The year 1968 was a turning point in the history of Czechoslovakia, and more broadly in the struggle between reform and repression within the Soviet-dominated Eastern Bloc. At its center stood Alexander Dubček, a Slovak communist whose brief leadership as first secretary of the Communist Party marked one of the most daring attempts to humanize socialism during the Cold War. His program of reforms, remembered as the Prague Spring, promised a socialism with a human face, combining political liberalization, cultural freedom, and economic change with continued loyalty to the socialist system. For a few months between January and August 1968, Czechoslovakia experienced an extraordinary flowering of openness and optimism, only to see it brutally extinguished by the Warsaw Pact invasion led by the Soviet Union. Although the experiment was short-lived, it profoundly shaped the political consciousness of Czechs and Slovaks, influenced the trajectory of the Cold War, and left Dubček with a legacy as both a reformer and a symbol of hope. Alexander Dubček was born on the 27th of November 1921 in Uhrovec, a small town in Slovakia that was then part of Czechoslovakia. His early years were shaped by both hardship and exposure to socialist ideals. His family spent time abroad, including in the Soviet Union, where Dubček gained familiarity with the theory and practice of communism. The tension between ideological promise and authoritarian reality would stay with him throughout his life. During the Second World War, he joined the Slovak resistance movement against the collaborationist regime of Josef Tiso and fought in the Slovak National Uprising of 1944. This experience cemented his commitment to socialism and to the cause of Czechoslovak independence, and it also gave him a reputation as a patriot and a man of principle. After the war, Dubček rose steadily through the ranks of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. The communist seizure of power in February 1948 opened opportunities for committed party members, and Dubček was entrusted with responsibilities within Slovakia, where he developed a reputation as a skilled administrator and a loyal party figure. Through the 1950s and early 1960s, he served in various leadership positions, including in the Slovak Communist Party, where he built a network of supporters. By the mid-1960s, however, Czechoslovakia was facing mounting difficulties. Economic stagnation, social dissatisfaction, and intellectual restlessness put increasing pressure on the rigid system created during the Stalinist era. Within the Communist Party itself, divisions emerged between hardliners who wanted to preserve the status quo and reformists who believed change was necessary. Dubček, with his Slovak background and reputation for pragmatism, came to be seen as a suitable leader to carry out reform while preserving party unity. On the 5th of January 1968, Dubček replaced Antonin Novotny as first secretary of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. Novotny had lost credibility both within the party and among the public, and his removal marked a turning point in the political climate. Dubček's appointment reflected the hope of many that a new chapter might begin, one that could combine socialist principles with responsiveness to the needs and aspirations of society. Though initially cautious, Dubček soon began to implement changes that broke with decades of rigid orthodoxy. His leadership quickly came to symbolize a reformist spirit that would inspire an extraordinary outpouring of public energy. The period that followed became known as the Prague Spring, lasting from January until August 1968. Dubček's vision was famously captured in the phrase "socialism with a human face." He sought to prove that socialism did not have to be synonymous with repression, censorship, and the silencing of public life. Under his leadership, censorship was abolished in March 1968, and the press, radio, and television blossomed into forums for open discussion. Newspapers published critical essays, writers revisited long-banned topics, and intellectuals engaged in debates about democracy, history, and justice. The release of political prisoners and the rehabilitation of victims of Stalinist purges symbolized the new atmosphere of openness. Ordinary citizens too felt a new sense of empowerment. Demonstrations, student rallies, and public meetings took place across the country, while workers expressed support for reforms through their organizations and trade unions. Cultural life, dormant for 2 decades, suddenly flourished. Political reforms also began to take shape. In April 1968, the action program of the Communist Party was adopted. outlining a series of measures to decentralize the economy, strengthen the rule of law, and expand civil liberties. Importantly, it also laid the groundwork for federalizing the country into two republics, Czech and Slovak, within a single federation. Dubček and his allies emphasized that Czechoslovakia would remain a loyal member of the Warsaw Pact and committed to socialism, but the rapid transformation of public life alarmed Moscow and the leadership of neighboring socialist states. The openness of debate, the flowering of independent initiatives, and the visible enthusiasm of the population all raised fears that the reforms could escape the party's control and inspire similar movements elsewhere in Eastern Europe. By the summer of 1968, the Soviet Union's patience had run out. Leonid Brezhnev and the Soviet Politburo viewed the Prague Spring not merely as a national experiment, but as a threat to the entire socialist bloc. In July and early August, Dubček was summoned to meetings in Warsaw and Bratislava, where he was pressured to rein in the reforms. He attempted to reassure Moscow that Czechoslovakia would not abandon socialism or its alliance commitments, but these promises were not convincing to hardliners in the Kremlin. On the night of 21st of August 1968, the Soviet Union, joined by Poland, Hungary and Bulgaria, launched an invasion of Czechoslovakia. The invasion shocked the population, but it was met with widespread non-violent resistance. Citizens confronted tanks, fraternized with confused soldiers, and removed road signs to hinder the occupying forces. The press continued to publish defiantly, and for a brief time the spirit of resistance electrified the nation. Dubček and other leaders were arrested and taken to Moscow, where they were subjected to intense pressure. Though he was allowed to return, he had been forced to accept the presence of Soviet troops and the curtailing of reforms. The Prague Spring was over. Dubček remained in his position until April 1969, but his authority was gone. In April, he was replaced by Gustav Husak, a Slovak communist loyal to Moscow. Under Husak, a period known as Normalization began. This meant the systematic reversal of all reforms, the reinstatement of censorship, the removal of reformist officials, and the reassertion of strict party control. In 1970, Dubček was expelled from the Communist Party, stripped of his remaining influence and assigned a minor post in forestry. For 2 decades he lived quietly, largely cut off from public life, a symbol of hopes dashed and possibilities destroyed. Yet Dubček's story did not end with his political downfall. When the communist regimes of Eastern Europe began to collapse in 1989, the memory of the Prague Spring resurfaced as a source of inspiration. In Czechoslovakia, the Velvet Revolution of November 1989 brought an end to communist rule through mass protests and non-violent resistance. Dubček returned to public life, greeted by enormous crowds who remembered him as the leader who had once tried to give socialism a human face. He was elected chairman of the Federal Assembly, the country's parliament, a position he held from late 1989 until 1992. In this role, he lent his authority and moral stature to the democratic transition. His contributions were recognized abroad as well, and he received the Sakharov Prize for Human Rights from the European Parliament. In 1992, as Czechoslovakia approached its dissolution into separate Czech and Slovak republics, Dubček remained an influential and respected figure. Tragically, on the 7th of November 1992, he died from injuries sustained in a car accident near Prague. His death was widely mourned across Europe, and he was remembered not simply as a politician but as a symbol of reform, decency, and the possibility of a humane socialism. The Prague Spring of 1968 remains one of the most significant episodes of the Cold War. It revealed both the deep desire of Central Europeans for freedom and the determination of the Soviet Union to suppress any deviation from its model of socialism. Dubček's attempt to create a system based on openness, legality, and trust between state and society was defeated, but it was not forgotten. When communism collapsed in 1989, the ideals of the Prague Spring resurfaced, and Dubček himself was restored as a figure of national pride. His legacy endures as a reminder that even in the darkest periods of repression, the desire for freedom and dignity, can never be permanently extinguished. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to Blistering History.